Welcome to everyone to the Tuesday, May 18th School Committee Subcommittee, Curriculum Subcommittee meeting. The first order of business is the approval of the April 27th School Committee Curriculum Subcommittee meeting. Is there anyone who can make a motion, who has read and reviewed them, that can make a motion to approve them?
Okay.
So should we come back to them at the next meeting?
You know, could we?
Yes.
That would be really
I think
nice.
so. Robin, is that acceptable?
That would be fine.
Okay, we've been pretty good and on track with all of our minutes, so I think if we need to come back to it the next time, I think that will be fine. So
Robin, if I could make a suggestion, Jennifer?
Yeah.
If Robin could attach them to the panelist email, we'll have it right there to open.
Okay.
That would be helpful.
All right, so we have a shift in the order of our agenda today. Hold on, I'm gonna try one more thing. No, that didn't work either. All right, I'm really trying. Okay, so we need to shift some things based on, we will still be covering the same items on the agenda, but in a slightly different order based on staff availability. So we are going to have up first our conversation about the update from special education on disproportionality will be up first on our agenda. And Nadine Mole is going to be presenting, and I see that Casey is also on this call, Casey No Miller. Welcome to both of you. I'm going to turn it over to you and we'll hear from you, and then we'll have opportunity for questions. Oh, I'm sorry. Before you start, Nadine, can I also say, I'm sorry, this not being able to have my camera on has thrown me off. I believe, if I'm not mistaken, we have quite a number of attendees today for our meeting. And so I greatly appreciate the interest in our meeting and the attendance, and want to thank all the members of our school communities that have joined us today. I do want to say that we have not docketed any public comment today, so we'll be hearing some presentations and questions from school committee members. Should members of the community want to share their thoughts, they are encouraged to at this time. If you would like to send it in writing via email to the school committee members, that information can be shared. So with that, and I understand and I appreciate everyone's interest in wanting to contribute. And we are interested in hearing from everyone, of course, but today we'll be gathering information. So Nadine and Casey, if you would like to take it over.
Sure. I don't really want Casey to drive and participate in this meeting. So I think maybe Casey can just listen and pipe in if she.
Good idea. Good idea.
For safety's sake, I think would be good. Am I able to share my screen? Do you know? I'll try. Nope, I can't.
But Robin can let you do that.
You should be able to now, Nadine.
Oh, thank you. Okay, so I have a presentation, and this is actually what I did as part of a new Special Ed Directors Leadership Institute. That we had to do a capstone project, and mine I felt would be it would be a good use of that project to look at the significant disproportionality. So I have a little presentation. It was supposed to be kind of like a TED Talk, but it does give you all of the information. It's not very long, and then I'd be happy to talk in more detail afterward to answer some questions. Okay, so let's see if the right thing pops up. Come on, you can do it. No, that's not the right thing, but that'll do it anyway. Here we go. Okay, so basically, as you know, or have probably heard, Brookline was found to have disproportionately identified Black and African American students as having specific learning disabilities in reading, writing, and math. So there's this recipe that we have developed, and I certainly did not do this on my own. There were a lot of contributors from across the district in terms of curriculum coordinators in math and literacy, psychologists, teachers, specialists, in general education and in special education that did this research together, including representation from the high school and Steps to Success. So I feel like this was kind of a good collaboration on this. So because the people I was speaking with weren't familiar with Brookline, I kind of put our mission and core values in, and I do feel that this issue does come back to this mission and the core values in terms of, high achievement for all, educational equity, and, the mission that every student will develop the skills and knowledge to pursue a productive and fulfilling life, participate in a democracy, succeed in a diverse and evolving global society. So the people I was talking with also didn't know much about Brookline, so I gave them the serving size of our recipe in terms of the students that we serve. So pre-pandemic, as you know, we had about 7,500 students, now just over 6,800. Here was the enrollment at the time, and the METCO population was 291 students, and the Steps to Success students, there were 257. And does everyone know what Steps to Success is? I feel like we do, but if you want to ask, I'm glad to talk about that too. So this is all based on the 2019 special education data, because that's what DESE used to calculate this disproportionality risk ratio. So at that time, we had 1,277 students in special ed. In the district, we had 468 Black and African American students. And of those, 35% of them were on IEPs. And you'll see risk ratio 2.3. That means that in our district, the likelihood that a Black or African American student will be found to have a disability and be on an IEP is, 2.3. So it's 2.3 times greater. You want a 1-to-1 ratio. So it's higher than would be expected. A 1-to-1 risk ratio means everybody has an equal chance or likelihood of landing in special education. This one, the risk is higher at 2.3. The next highest category here at that time was the Hispanic students. So 26% of our Hispanic students were on IEPs in 2019 with a risk ratio of 1.73. All the other ethnicities had a risk ratio below 1. And then people wanted to know, how do we serve our special ed students? We have pre-K programs, learning centers, our district-wide programs, and there are variations of those district-wide programs from ages pre-K to 22. More nutrition facts. This is what came from the collaboration of the people that I mentioned before in our district. We also had the opportunity to meet with districts across the state as part of professional learning communities to talk about this. So, the way they were looking at their data and the way we were looking at our data sort of fed and fueled each other's analysis. So here's what we found out. And this is a broad overview. 45, so we're looking at 53 kids right now. 45% of them were identified in grades K to 2. 7 of them moved in with a specific learning disability diagnosis already, or disability. 32%, so a third of them, have a specific learning disability in all 3 areas, meaning reading, writing, and math. More than half of these 53 students are either in STEPS or METCO. So we had 27 resident students who are Black or African American, and 16 of those are in Steps to Success. And we have 26 METCO students in this 53 students who are identified. We have a higher number of students coming from certain K to 8 schools. So that's something to think about and look at. Some schools do have a higher percentage of these students. So you would think, okay, maybe their percentage would be higher, but even so, it's still not proportionate to what we would expect based on the school. And we also found that 45% of the students didn't receive a math intervention and could have from child study team. So this is kind of what we're dealing with. So this is a cake fail. And the reason I have this cake fail here is because I learned a lot about baking from my grandmother, and I learned it by accident. This is not my cake. I don't know that I could make this cake, but what I learned from my grandmother as I tried to make one of her cake recipes was that if you don't put the right ingredients in the right order and do the right things to them at the right time, you end up, instead of a cake, you end up with a cookie. So all the ingredients were in there, but it was not a cake, it was a cookie. So that was my cake fail. And that's why I kind of felt like this was a good, good metaphor for what we're trying to do here. We want to really get this recipe right. So why this recipe at this time? So previous recipes haven't effectively reduced the disproportionate identification of these students. So our risk ratio was over 3.0 in 2017 to 2019, because that's the data that the state was using, and probably will be again this year. In contrast, we were sort of at risk for disproportionate identification in the communication category, but we changed that. We changed that by really tightening up what are the eligibility criteria for students to have a communication disability. What are the schools using for testing? How are the speech language pathologists participating in team meetings? So that went down. So we're no longer even at risk in that category. So we can do this, but it takes a lot of, there's a lot of moving parts involved. So here's what's changed already since this data was calculated. We have foundations in place in grades K to 2. That's really big. And the district finally settled on an elementary math curriculum, but instruction has been disjointed during the pilot phases because some students were learning some things and some students were learning others. So here is what we see as our cake fail based on that work we did together, our root causes. I love this one, this like overcooked cake over here, because that sort of is a metaphor for what might happen in LLI that I could talk about in a second. So here's what might be contributing to our issue, that every school has its own structures. Our students who are Black and Brown are often falling in the approaches and below expectation reading assessment categories, and that doesn't change significantly year to year. Inconsistencies in Tier 1 instruction. So Tier 1 instruction is really what is the general classroom instruction that all students are getting to make sure that they're building the necessary skills at the right time in these areas. We wonder about trauma-informed instruction. We wonder, are students really taking in what's being presented if we're using the right approach? We wonder about how clear the understanding of the diagnostic criteria for qualifying for a specific learning disability. And we wonder about the transition from K-8 to high school and how that information does or doesn't travel up there. At the high school, there's really not gen ed literacy support for students. You can receive a reading intervention if you're in special ed. And then in terms of what would be, it says Tier 1 and Tier 2. So what would be taught at the general classroom level and what would be sort of one step up more specialized from that, a small group, more frequent instruction, still within general education. Those aren't clearly identified. And then finally, I would say this is true both at the elementary and the high schools. We really have to work on structures for learning and professional development and applied practice so that as we're starting to bring these things on board, teachers will continuously be learning and be using similar approaches, and then we will have supported the adults that we are hoping in turn will support the students. So who are our baking staff? This is what I was saying before. We have a lot of people that would be involved in this endeavor to really reduce this significant disproportionality. We need our gen ed classroom teachers, our intervention specialists, and curriculum leaders to help identify the math and literacy screening tools. We need, our department heads and specialists to help us develop and roll out our screening measures over a 2-year period, because I do think it may take that long to really nail it down and train everybody. School leaders and curriculum leaders to help standardize instruction in literacy and math as best we can. So we know what all students are getting, regardless of what elementary they came from. We need our specialists and coaches to help provide professional development to our child study team members to increase the accurate identification of struggling students and know what interventions to use. And then we need our special education directors, to provide PD to team facilitators and special education staff, to ensure a common understanding of the criteria that we're using. And they had asked about a neurological disability category, which is why that's in there. Some districts are overusing that, but we are not, which is really good. So in a large bowl, this is our theory of action. You combine your classroom-based instruction, you combine your grade level screening tools to progress monitor, you have high fidelity and quality interventions in the areas of need for students who require it. We quickly identify students who are not responsive to those interventions. We don't need 3 and 4 rounds of intervention if a student isn't responding. And we need continued review of the intervention data by teams who are trained in the identification of specific learning disability. So it says bake at 350 for 180 days or until the following early evidence of change is observed. So we hope if things are going in the right directions, by the end of next year, we will have our K-2 classrooms using literacy and math screenings. Our at-risk students will be quickly referred to time-limited math and literacy interventions. And when they don't respond, they will be referred for a special education evaluation. And we'll have child study team and consults with classroom teachers that provides feedback to the classroom teachers about how their classroom instruction is going and what impact it is or isn't having on kids. It's a freeze leftover batter. This is going to take a little while, so I'm not going to read this all to you, but we have screening targets, like a time frame by which the screenings will be done. We have a time frame by which the interventions, we want to have those in place, and then we have professional development targets. And voila. So if we've got all of the right things going on in the right order at the right time, we will have a cake that's not a cake fail, and that will really go back to our core values. So that's that. Happy to answer questions.
Before we take questions, Jennifer, is it okay if I just add a bit more information?
Of course.
Thank you. So just folks know, I don't, and forgive me, Nadine, if you've already covered this because I was in the car going back and forth doing kid transfers. So once we were identified as experiencing the significant disproportionality in Brookline, DESE requires that all identified districts complete a year-long process where we are part of a learning community that walks us through the process of identifying who our student population is, who are being over-identified, what commonalities are there, what trends are we seeing. Then we begin to look at root causes. So why do we think these students are being funneled into special education under the category also of specific learning disability? And then to look at what policies and procedures do we have in place that perhaps we need to revisit, revamp, or create to look at this issue and address it before students make their way to special education. So we just completed that process by submitting our last step, which is to submit an action plan. And much of what Nadine put there in terms of that last slide with dates is our proposal to the state. I don't know what happens after that. I'm waiting to hear from them in terms of whether or not they will give us feedback on our action plan or if they accept it as is. But as I'm sure folks are probably picking up, much of this work, there's overlap between special ed and gen ed. And some of it too will be what Linus leads in terms of our strategic planning. We've talked a lot about essential curriculum. So it really touches a lot on a lot of areas, which I think is timely with the new superintendent coming in and our focus on refocusing on our core values and what does that mean when it comes to a Brookline education. So I just wanted to give that sort of overview in terms of the process that we went through and what to expect for next year, and who really are the major players in terms of the departments. Thanks, Jennifer. And thank you, Nadine.
Yeah.
Are there members of the subcommittee who have questions? Or of the subcommittee, I'm sorry, of the school committee in general?
Yeah.
Ellen, you look like maybe you have a question?
Yes, because I mean, it's interesting having had the perspective of many years. These numbers haven't changed, and we have attempted at different times to do things. And I'm not sure what we're doing wrong, to be honest, that it's not changing. But I remember that we thought that the BAS and, you know, the new leveled literacy was going to be the be all and, but it doesn't seem to have done it either. I mean, I think it's good teaching that does it, but, you know, the question is, and it's not that teachers aren't, you know, I'm not trying to blame teachers in any way here. This is hard. This is hard. I mean, so much of it happens before the kids even get to kindergarten. As you know, the literature says. So I assume we're doing things with pre-K too, to try and get kids ready to learn to read and do math. So you had said something, Nadine, about doing baseline testing. Is that the BAS or is there some other one we're using, or what is the plan?
Well, we are, so because of this process, I think 15%, Casey, of our IDEA funds have to be put toward helping to remedy what's going on. And some of that money may be used to kind of look at what instruments we want to use for those baseline measures and to make sure, you know, we've picked good ones and that teachers are trained and they know how to respond to the data in their classroom to help the students at the classroom.
Will we use some of that money for pre-K too, so we can follow these kids, you know, over 5-6 years?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, pre-K does a really nice job of sending us their IGDs data, and the kindergarten teachers have that. And so we actually know in BEEP who is sort of coming in, that we have in BEEP with a vulnerability, and we keep a very good eye on them in kindergarten. It's, you know, kindergarten up that we now have, you know, streamlined and consistent foundations in place. That's different. That wasn't there when we started the BAS and the LLI piece. So, you know, I think that putting those things in place at the classroom level are also going to shift things, or at least I hope so.
One of the things that was mentioned was tier 1 instruction and supports, so general education supports. And some of those were like the implementation of a math program, which had been in a piloted phase and is now in full implementation. What are the expectations around when we would see results, positive results from a comprehensive and consistent tier 1? Is there sort of, what is your professional opinion about when we might be able to see some positive effects of that?
Just a clarification question. Are you asking when we will begin to see the impact of the new math curriculum or a screener that we put in place?
Well, I guess in some way, I think I'd like to generalize the question using sort of like the math program as just an example that people might be familiar with. So it, went through a number of review phases, and then there was a piloting phase, and then there was, further implementation and then full implementation. But for example, if you start, it takes a number of years in order for that to sort of scale itself up, meaning that when students get access to that in, say, kindergarten, and then first grade, and then second grade and third grade. So it takes a number of years for kids to have consistent access to that curriculum to really build the skills. Maybe someone else can speak more eloquently to this idea. So I'm just wondering, if there was a screener or other curricular things that we implemented, when would we hope, like about what amount of time or number of years do we think that it might take to sort of see some potential benefits of, how will we know if the tier 1 implementation is working and doing what we want? If we identify it as a root cause, how will we know that it's becoming part of the solution?
Yeah, I think that, I would hope that we, provided that all the folks get the training, receive the training that we hope that they get, but within a year, we're seeing fewer students who identify as African American and Black are being referred to special education under a specific learning disability. Now, just to be clear, that doesn't mean, though, any student who identifies as Black or African American will not be denied special education services and testing. But that we would see, when we think about that risk ratio, we're seeing more of a 1-to-1.
One of the things that we talked about at our last curriculum subcommittee meeting was the child study team process, and that we have been doing some review of that process. And I think that one of the slides, Nadine, that you mentioned was about timeliness and identifying students who are not responding to intervention. And that I know that's a frequent source of frustration for, I'm going to project my own thoughts about it for both educators and parents and students, that sometimes we don't see the growth, and there may be many rounds to that. And so there was also some a reference to some potential inconsistencies, or I mean inconsistencies just in that it is inconsistent across school to school. The process that you might submit a form for consideration for a child to bring a child to child study team, the amount of time it might take to get a child into child study team just because of the needs and the availability of spaces to do so. So I'm just wondering what kinds of things that you all might be interested or plan to implement to address those kinds of issues, so that we can really utilize that child study team to provide intervention, to make sure that that we're seeing progress and growth. And if we are, then, we're not jumping to evaluation, but that also that kids are not sort of stuck in a loop for a while. And I'm not saying that is or is not happening, but it's a common national problem. And so what are we doing here to help that?
Yeah, one big piece that our team talked about that worked on this is there aren't consistent practices that all of the CS team members engage in when talking about a student. So for example, they're not all the teams are not asking the same questions about a student's background with regard to traumatic experiences, which we know has a significant impact on a student's ability to learn. They're just not. Students who come with traumatic backgrounds, even if it's just one traumatic experience, it's harder to access that part of the brain and have them be ready to learn when they have such an experience. And so when you take that into consideration, you might look at a student's learning profile very differently and suggest a different course of intervention if you have that training. So that's one example in terms of what we hope to offer for CSTs next year. And again, this is where my team can lead this from a special ed perspective and a student support perspective. But we really need to partner closely with OTL when Leslie comes on board, even more so to push this more, because my office we don't oversee the CSTs. We can certainly impact and have a say. I don't know if there's more you want to offer, Michelle. I know you were active on that team also.
Yeah, I think thinking about, and there's a couple of things that have been themes on this curriculum subcommittee all year is about the tools, and Jennifer started to talk about the tools for assessing where kids are along the way in their learning, and so that we start to use some other strategies before they make it even to CST. And with the new, for instance, the new math program, there is a ton of opportunity to assess student learning along the way formatively, to kind of see what path they're going down. And we're just in the midst of learning about that. So this year is year 1 implementation for grades 3 through 5, next year K through 2. And I think Nadine talked a lot about the training that people need. And I think Jennifer, you talked about it too. And so, you know, it's not an instant like we implement 1 year and we'll see an immediate decrease. But I think if we start to get better practice at using our tools for identifying student needs in the tier 1 instruction, less students will come to CST and eventually less students be identified for a special education evaluation. But it is in the tier 1, and really also looking at our culturally responsive instruction and considering what are the strategies that we need to use that address all students and not just teach towards one group. Not that we do that, but just as a process that we would be in.
Are there any other members of the curriculum subcommittee or attending school committee members who would like to speak? Is that Susan? Are you Susan?
Good, thank you very much. I just have a couple of questions. One is, it was a little hard to tell the effects by race and income because they did seem to be pulled together. I think it's important for us to be able to pull those apart because there are probably different things going on because METCO and STEPS, as you started to explain, are very different programs. So I think one would be it would be helpful to understand those differences. I guess the second thing is that there was, really appreciate the focus on tier 1. As a place to focus. I'm also mindful that there wasn't a lot on here about implicit bias, about structural racism, about how do we think through what some of those subjective factors are and really kind of rewind the clock with that lens on. So I hope it's in there. I assume it is, but I didn't see it on any of the slides when we were looking at the root causes slide. So I think it would be helpful to understand. I definitely understand the pieces around foundations and math curriculum, and I'm fine with all that. It just felt to me like there's as big, if not a bigger piece around cultural competence and systemic racism that I think we would want to see what kinds of things are we assessing? What are we looking for? What are we noticing? What kinds of practices are we putting in place for our educators and child study teams? And then what are we doing about it? I just would like to see that as a theme all the way through here. I guess the final thing is that there's not a lot in here about families and the role of families in this process. And I think it would be really helpful to understand, particularly in cases of overrepresentation, you know, it may be true that there is a learning disability that many people in the family have. That's a different situation from if that's not the case. And so it just does feel to me like, especially when we're talking about overrepresentation, really understanding what the family role is important, bringing them in as sort of full partners. So anyway, I'm delighted we're having this conversation. I just as all presentations kind of raises more questions than it answers, but I appreciate the conversation.
I definitely appreciate your points too. I think, you know, that is in there. It's not, and I think should be more visible on the slide. So thanks for that.
Are there any other questions? I just want to be mindful of the time. It's just about 4:30 now. We have 3 main agenda items today. So are there any other questions? I think I would just follow up and say I'd love to see us come back to this conversation a little farther into the process. You had that last slide there that had a number of action steps. And so if we could come back and sort of get some progress on how those things are doing, what does the implementation look like? You know, just another thought I had was what would be sort of the impact, potential benefits of project-based learning and interdisciplinary learning on student engagement and, you know, thinking about that tier 1. But also, you know, as we continue to build our tier 1 essential curriculum, you know, thinking about how we build in structures to make sure we're being culturally responsive as well into that work. So I think there's a lot of great things coming together. And in lieu of any other questions from committee members, I would like to thank you both greatly and invite you to come back and meet with us and give us an update a little farther along in your process. Oh, Helen?
Sorry, just one, because it struck me when you were talking about the trauma and working on those issues. I'm assuming that the social workers we're going to be hiring will be also working on some of these issues with teachers, with families, not necessarily with individual kids, but in the full milieu, so that they're more aware and cognizant of it.
Yeah, that's certainly one of the criteria that we're looking for when we're hiring is experience with trauma-informed practices with the goal of training staff and being a part of this work, for sure.
Great. Thank you.
Yeah, I think that point about adverse events is really important when we have this conversation. And I'd love maybe at another subcommittee meeting to talk about our professional development plans going forward and sort of on a more systemic level. But I think that's outside of the bounds of today's conversation. So thank you both, Nadine and Casey, for coming. I really appreciate it. Thank you for joining us and sharing this information. And we look forward to hearing more details in the future. And as always, you're welcome to stay, but you're also welcome to continue the other work that I'm sure that you have in your lives. I think the next agenda item that we will be addressing is the update on 9th grade wellness. And so I see that Michelle Herman is here. I see that Anthony Meyer is here, Hal Mason, Brendan Kobus. I thank you all for coming, especially in light of also coming to finance yesterday. So I was wondering if you could perhaps give us sort of the recap or update, the highlights of that, because there were some committee members who were not able to attend and the recording is probably not yet up and available. So we're here to talk about an update on 9th grade wellness. There were some changes that, well, I'll let you explain it much better than I can. Who would like to speak first?
I'm happy to do that, Jennifer. So yes, we had the pleasure of coming to policy subcommittee yesterday in order to talk about the 9th grade health component of our 9th grade health and fitness or wellness education course. And it was a wide-ranging conversation around what sort of requirement is this, meaning we have understood it as a state requirement, and so needed to seek more information from DESE around which element, health or fitness or both, are state requirements. So that was a portion of yesterday's conversation. And then how do we support students in accessing curriculum that we think is really important, regardless of whether it is a state requirement or something that Brookline has embraced. So we're joined by Carlin Wayanoma, our wellness education curriculum coordinator. She did follow up with her DESE contact and came to understand through that conversation that the 4-year requirement, as it's articulated, though it's a little general, that 4-year requirement, we believe from the state, is around fitness every year, not the health component. So I think that leaves us with a desire for clarity from Brookline, whether from this subcommittee or more generally about whether we would hold kids to the health requirement. I want to be very clear. We think it's super important, and Carlin could articulate some of the different components around healthy decision-making, healthy relationships, CPR. I'm now listing some of those, but CPR, first aid more generally, what we have long called sex ed, all of those pieces we think are really important. And then wonder whether there can be flexibility in how we're supporting students to access that important content. So I would just say, dropping back a second, we went into yesterday's meeting with a clear plan that we were offering access to this curriculum through summer school and through required 10th grade course, a required 10th grade wellness course. And I think we're trying to think through whether those are our only options or whether there's some greater flexibility. Hearing from families both concerns about their children's ability to access our summer offerings and what would be the ramifications if students take wellness next year or this required 10th grade course and can't opt out for athletics. What does that mean for their access to our greater program? So we heard from some parents yesterday. So I think that's where we are now. I don't know, Hal or Carlin or Brendan, if you would offer more to that, you're welcome to.
Yeah, just to follow up with Anthony, we think that a lot of these units are really important. Some of it's the old school idea of what health class is, but it's also CPR. It's also mindfulness. A lot of that work that we've been doing over the years has been picked up by the wellness educators, and it really is what we think is something that's essential in helping us create the culture of BHS. So while we're certainly open and flexible in how we will approach it and how we will get these lessons, let's say, out to kids, we think it's important, and we don't want to just say, oh, we'll just skip it for the class of 2024. We think we have to figure out some way, whether it's through the wellness class they take next year or in some other way that they get these lessons.
I'll just say, Helen, I'm sorry my video is off. This is Carlin Wayno-Yama. I'll second what Anthony and Hal said in terms of offering comprehensive, health education to our students, and especially around healthy decision-making, the human sexuality components. We've done a lot of work and training with our trauma-sensitive approaches, and just really, we know that this is something that we want every student from Brookline High School to get, and we want it to be done in a comprehensive way. And we designed, a Canvas course with modules that meet the national standards around health education. So I'm really grateful that, Brookline High School administration and Brookline in general knows that these are important topics that we are working on. And we want our students to have access. And I will work with Anthony and Hal and Brendan to make sure that students have access, that they need, especially in terms of special education students and other students that need to access the curriculum.
Thank you, Carlin. I'm so glad that you could join us for some time today. I appreciate that. I'm sorry if I didn't mention you in the original cast, a list of folks who are here to join us for this topic. And I guess I am concerned that students would not get this material. I think some of these topics are really important for young people, especially, CPR and first aid are great and important, but so are healthy relationships, human sexuality. And if they don't get that, we can't make an assumption that everyone would just get that in some other form, I think. And so I think these are some really important concepts that I think that, we have offered to our young people. And so I am just mindful. I'm hopeful that we will find some balance between flexibility to meet our students' needs, but also to provide this curriculum that Brookline has offered. These are really important topics for our young people as they become adults and their own people. So that's something that weighs on my mind. Are there other folks that would like to add information or to ask questions? I see some subcommittee members. I see Helen, and then after Helen, Susan.
So I feel like I've come in the second season, and I'm not exactly sure what happened in the first season. Thank you, Susan. That's owed to you. But this year, the students got what in terms of physical education and health education? the ninth graders? And well, that's my first question.
Carlin, I think you might be best positioned to answer that.
Helen, thanks for the question. So the students, the ninth graders this year didn't have their entire course that they normally get. So they normally get, 4 days a week, 2 days of sort of this health education component and 2 days a week of the physical education component. And based on the learning model for the year and the structure, et cetera, that didn't happen. So we made sure, I guess it was a decision. Again, I came to the second half as you did in the end of the summer, right? So there was some programming discussions at the end during the summer around how we could best meet the needs of our learners in this environment. And so the decision was made that we'd sort of shift that health component, Helen, of the wellness of the integrated class to the 10th grade year in an effort to make sure that students, quite honestly, didn't miss. They missed the end of 8th grade in terms of their health education, especially human sexuality. And based on, creating the culture that we want at Brookline High School, which we think is really important, we wanted to have a comprehensive health education, especially around, as Anthony mentioned, healthy relationships, healthy decision-making, communication, all these things that we know to be really important for our culture at Brookline High School.
Well, I'm not questioning the value of this. I mean,
Right.
I when I was PTO president, I brought the Planned Parenthood program into Brookline
Which
High
we are
School,
now using, and Helen, I'll tell you, we're using the updated version of that, which is
much better.
more inclusive. And Jennifer, I think I sent along the inclusivity and the more inclusive programming that we're doing with trauma sensitive approaches and aspects of consent, et cetera, et cetera. So we're using the updated version of that. And that, to Helen, to your point, that's the other thing. We want to make sure that these students don't miss that.
But that's like a 2-week course, right?
It can be a little bit longer. It's one of our modules, and I would imagine it's going to be at minimum of, if we see the students twice a week over the course of this, we see them twice a week for the semester, right? And by the way, this course will meet the students' wellness education requirement. That's part of our general graduation requirement. So they don't have to do both, right? So they can do, this will meet their 10th grade requirement.
So
they don't have to do this. And
that was my second question. I don't know if the requirements have changed. I might have missed something at one point. What are the requirements for physical education, health and wellness, 9th through 12th?
The requirement is that students take wellness every year. They take the fitness every year.
And Hal, just to put a finer
But
point on that.
The sports, if they contract out.
Correct.
Then
10th through 12th graders, sorry, Helen, can contract out by playing a sport. So all 9th graders take health and fitness, and then some percentage of 10th, 11th, and 12th graders take an actual health and fitness or wellness education class,
Right.
and a good number contract out through participation on high school sports teams.
right.
That hasn't changed. Those graduation requirements have not changed, nor has Hal is right when he says every year a student must take health and fitness. I'm just trying to make sure the curriculum subcommittee understands there are a couple ways to meet that requirement.
Right. Then my last question is, so it's this year's 9th graders, correct?
Yes.
We still have 5 weeks or so of school, 4 weeks. What do we have? Is there a reason we couldn't do those modules now?
I don't believe with the schedule that we currently have that we'd be able to do that, Helen. And you'd also only get half the 9th grade. So I don't, it would.
Oh, because half have taken it already in the
Correct.
fall.
Because they only take it one semester.
Mhm.
It's only a 1 semester course, 2 days a week.
Right. No, I'm aware of that. That I remember. I was trying to, see what options there were. Go ahead, Susan. So you're on. I'm done.
So thank you for this and for the conversation yesterday. It does feel like we've had the same conversation twice, so I appreciate your time. I'm much more flexible on where and how this can get delivered than whether it should get delivered. I think we've spent a tremendous amount of time talking about social emotional learning and about whole child wellness and about mindfulness and sex ed and healthy relationships and healthy decision making and all those different pieces. Those don't seem optional to me. They do seem like they should be part of what's required. I assume there's also, we didn't mention LGBTQ issues, but I think there's a lot of issues about what people do and don't understand about LGBTQ issues at the high school, as I know you all just sort of went through. So I think there's sort of a lot of reasons why it doesn't feel like an optional thing to me, regardless of what Desi says. That said, I'm certainly flexible on how it gets delivered or where. I mean, the scheduling at the high school, I literally cannot wrap my head around it. It's like 4-dimensional wizards Tetris. I don't know what it is. It's incredibly complex. And so I can't imagine any of us sort of coming up with a better scheduling answer. But at any rate, my 2 cents are it should still be required, and we should figure out whatever the best way is to do that. So thank you for being here.
I might just quick put a finer point on Jennifer, what you said, and Susan, you were emphasizing it also about how important this content is. 9th grade is the only place that we require at the high school health education. We certainly touch on it in our advisory program during Tina Bozeman's tenure as the coordinator of wellness education. She brought an advanced wellness class so that older students could also interface with these, have experience, exposure to similar topics, but at a later date. And so that could also be an option here, is looking at advanced wellness. But it seems like what we need to do is take a couple of days in order to look at all of our options. I think we have the responsibility to our families, and I know that Carlin has worked on this and communicated with parents and guardians to just say, these are the topics in our health education program that students currently in 9th grade have not experienced. We see this as this has long been an important Brookline requirement. We are trying to figure out the best way for kids to be able to access that curriculum, offering some level of flexibility. And that's where I get a little bit where the email in my head is not yet in the language it needs to be, because I think we need to work through what are those options and how do we best emphasize how important this curriculum is. And the part that Carlin has said, having BHS and PSB educators delivering it. So it seems like we need to circle back to you all or to the larger school committee with what we see as the options moving forward.
I really appreciate everyone's time. This is the second sort of back-to-back meeting that we've had about this. I really appreciate, I know that a lot of communication and time has been going on about this, and just you're making me think when you were talking, Anthony. I think I've had beginnings of conversations about an interest in talking about our overall wellness program, 5 through 12, and what that looks like and what we offer students at another time, and not necessarily, it's not necessarily a part of this conversation, but just an ongoing interest in thinking about, part social emotional, part physical wellness, mindfulness, all of these things. How do we best meet the needs of our students, and what does that program look like as it builds over the years? So I just sort of throw that idea out for a future meeting. I'd be interested in that. Are there any other questions before we move on? Steve?
Thanks, Jennifer. And hi, Anthony and Hal. I don't think I've met you before. Nice to meet you. A couple of questions, and forgive my ignorance. A lot of this is new to me. I saw some parent emails that were concerned about repetition in the wellness course that might have to be borne through the summer. Could you comment at all on that, whether the summer course is duplicative at all of some of the curriculum that was taken this past year?
Thanks
And
for the
then I have
question.
one more question also.
Do you want to do that, and then Carlin can answer the first question?
Sure. Then the second question is about how the wellness course requirement affects children with special needs, whether it's, from my understanding, it means that they have one fewer elective that they can take, and that is, an unhappy outcome for a lot of families. Have you? I also recognize that there are a lot of logistical concerns to balance right now. Could you comment also on how you've thought through that decision?
Absolutely. Hal and I can speak to that second piece, and Carlin can speak to the duplicative, whether the summer course is at all duplicative. Go ahead, Carlin. Thanks, Steve.
Hi, Steve. I'm Carlin Wayne-Oyama. Nice to meet you. Welcome. The course this summer that's being offered, the wellness course that with a 10th grade integrated wellness course with a health focus, will not be duplicative because the course will be exactly what the students would be receiving, hopefully, during the school year. So we've created a course that's a skills-based course around health topics and with content. So the answer is, will there be some made with their current course that they're taking 1 day a week? Have they had a little bit of exposure to some of decision-making skills and communication and mindfulness? Yes, I hope so, because that's the ethos of a wellness educator. But the specific human sexuality curriculum, the depression, mental health curriculum that we do, the CPR and first aid curriculum, all that curriculum will be implemented in the summer course, as well as next year during the semesters. So I think the answer is no. In terms of are they just getting the exact same thing? The answer is no, because they haven't had access to that curriculum this year.
Thanks, Carlin. And this is required content for their graduation?
For Brookline High School, yes.
So is there any fee associated then with taking this as a summer course?
I can say there is currently, and that's a decision that we're reviewing. So we do, in our current summer school catalog, the course is the wellness education course is listed at a cost of $400. We're still seeking clarity on our summer school budget, and we may have taken the wrong approach in terms of charging for a course that satisfied a graduation requirement. We were being a little more conservative in our decision making, and are still seeking clarity just on what we can and should do with summer school offerings and how that interconnects with budget. And I can take that moment, if it makes sense, to, well, one, welcome you to school committee, Stephen, and answer your question, which has long been an issue. So if you imagine, and I do not play 4D Tetris, or, this is Hal Mason as our brilliant scheduler. But what I do know is that we have 7 blocks, A through G, as well as a Z block that most kids don't take advantage, but some. But if you stick with the 7 blocks, and we imagine that the overwhelming majority of our students take the 5 traditional or core academic subjects of world language, math, science, social studies, and English, you've used up 5 of your 7 blocks. From there, if you have 1 block of academic support, you are absolutely right to name students within special education who are served by a learning center. Not all are, but the overwhelming majority are, and are in those learning centers during a typical year when classes meet 4 times a week. So with that remaining block, if you have 6 of 7 blocks taken up, you are balancing meeting an elective requirement of 3.0 courses or 3.0 credits, 3-year-long classes or 6 semester-long classes of elective credits, as well as meeting your wellness requirements. So it impacts not only students in special education, and that's important to note, it also impacts students who take tutorial, which is mostly a general ed academic support year-long that meets 4 times a week. We've experimented with some flexibility to that end because we find that some students don't need or want all 4 blocks and can use 2 blocks and then nest with it a class that might meet twice a week. It also impacts our students who take African American and Latino scholars, which generally meets 4 times a week and is not an academic support necessarily, and certainly not wholly. It's a much more global support for students, that they don't have as much access to our full elective program, given just the limits of our schedule overall. So that's important when we're imagining what our offerings are versus what the interests are. So I would say, to your second part of your question, which I think is even more important, is how does it factor into our decision making? That is where Hal is looking carefully at what our offerings are, what they're opposed to, and also some of the pathways or alternatives that we offer students. So those are a couple thoughts. Hal, I don't know if you would offer more, being the master scheduler.
Yeah, it's about half of our kids take classes in the continue to take classes as wellness classes in the upper grades, and about half look at and use sports for a to satisfy that requirement. There's also some that take dance to satisfy that requirement. The reality is that for most students, though, there is space available in the schedule at some point over the 3 years, in between 10th and 11th grade. And we also add in the ability in most years to take something as a Z-block class, where students could add an 8th class to their day to fulfill the wellness requirement. I do want to clarify one thing that is. Sorry about that.
Hal, are you trying to show us a certain element of your shirt? Because so far we're clear on that.
No, I'm just trying to mute a different sound that came on. I've got dueling Zooms going on right now. It's confusing. Where were we? I do want to clarify one element of what we were talking about from yesterday, while I have the chance. We talked yesterday about the virtual, it wouldn't work well as a virtual class. That's to say, if we had people working at the same time online. And the issue there really was, and we didn't articulate this clearly yesterday, the issue there really was that we don't have in the gyms mounted projection and the camera system that set up so that we would have been able to teach simultaneously the same groups with the in-person kids. And so that was part of the reasoning, going back to the summer and the early fall, when we were talking about this with Carlin, why we decided to not run the wellness component of the 9th grade curriculum. We just didn't think that we'd be able to do it. Again, we didn't know exactly how the year was going to play out at that time. If you remember, in September, things were still very up in the air, and we were looking at, are we going to do remote first? And then we went to the hybrid model, and there was all sorts of things that changed over the course of that year, over the course of the beginning of this year. And so we just didn't know physically how we'd be able to do it within the wellness classes that we had set up. And I have to say, the wellness teachers have been amazing this year. They have dealt with more uncertainty and changes, and needed to be more flexible, pun intended, I guess, than any other teacher in the school, because of the restrictions that DESE put on how they could teach and where they could teach. Juggling, yes, it's a 4-dimensional chess, but in the wellness department, we added an extra dimension of indoors sometimes and outdoors at other times. And they on their own said, wait, we have a better way to do this. We're going to take the kids that are in person, even if they're not scheduled to be in on Monday. We know that they're in the building on Monday. We're going to take those kids and pull those kids into our Monday session. And then when they're remote on the Thursday, again, this was for the whole hybrid period, they went ahead and juggled that. So really, they did an incredible job of managing what was a very difficult schedule for them. And again, they were very used to having 4 meetings of the 9th grade class, and we really reduced that to one in-person meeting, one long in-person meeting, and a short 25-minute session on Wednesdays.
Jennifer, if I could just make one concluding remark, and then I'll stop talking.
Yes, because I just want to be mindful. We have 25 minutes left, and we have another agenda item to get to. So if there's any last clarifying thoughts, and before Steve speaks, I just want to thank all of you for coming to talk about this topic again. And it sounds like the next steps, barring any other future comments in the moment, the next steps will be the high school will be thinking about this. Okay, great. Steve?
Okay, really briefly, just thank you very much for answering my question, and thank you for the welcome. And just to be clear, my concern wasn't that the majority of students didn't have access to that extra elective block, but that I just wanted a little bit more insight on how the high school makes decisions about making sure that children with special needs as a class, as a cohort, have the opportunity to get the same number of electives and the same freedom and richness of education as general education students. But thank you very much.
Thank you all so much for coming, for joining and having this conversation with us. And we look forward to getting some future details as you've had time to think about options and possibilities. As always, you're welcome to stay, but I'm sure that you all also have many other jobs to do. Sincerely, thank you so much for coming today and talking with us. Thank you,
everyone. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to put one quick thing in the chat too that I was going to speak to, and now I'm actually speaking to, but I'm just going to include that information because I think it's some of our alternatives to graduation requirements that we offer students. But I think Steve's larger point about how we're supporting students in special education is more important than these alternatives that I'll link to in a moment.
Thank you, Anthony.
Thank you all.
Thank you so much. Thanks, Carlin, Hal, Anthony, Brendan. Thank you for coming. Our third agenda item today that we're going to be addressing is, I'm sorry, I'm moving things around on my screen here to take a look at my agenda. We'll be talking about 6th grade programming. And Dr. Marini, did you want to start us off today?
Well, thank you, Jen. And first, let me thank you very, very much for making room on the agenda. I know you have a full agenda with important things that you're discussing, so it's with great appreciation that the subcommittee has allowed this group for Mr. Lewis to present. At the last school committee meeting, there were a number of comments made regarding the schedule, the structure, the organization that Mr. Lewis is putting in place at the 6th grade level in order to support young adolescent students as they go through their middle grade years. And the school committee did not have sufficient background to be able to understand the comments or put them in context. And so Ms. Lewis and I thought that maybe we should come to the subcommittee, so to at least get an sort of an understanding of what's happening at the Baker School and the kind of thinking that's happening there and kind of planning that's going on to try to support students as they move into their middle grades. And it's more important you hear from Mr. Lewis than you hear from me. So I'm going to flip it over to him. And Torrance, thank you for all that you do. And I know that this is a busy time of the year. So, coming here without much notice is appreciated for you too. So thank you. And I'm anxious to hear your comments. Thanks.
All right, no problem. Thank you. Thank you, Jim. Good afternoon, everyone. I also want to comment, I'm not here on my own. I have 3 other panelists here with me. I have Patricia English-Sand, she's our upper school vice principal, Joshua Howe, our lower school vice principal, and also Allison Henry, who's our education team facilitator, work with special education. Also, I'm here to inform and answer questions, so feel free to ask questions when we're going through this. And also to kind of let you guys know, I talked to Pat, Josh, and Allison. I gave them permission to interject and chime in throughout because they're right here at Baker, and it may seem a little bit informal, but I think it's the best way to handle this. So let's get started. So you heard about.
I'm sorry. Can I interject, Mr.
Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry,
Yeah.
Principal Lewis, I should have welcomed you all. I'm sorry. I was looking at my schedule and I went right to Dr. Marini. We welcome you. Thank you for coming to the curriculum subcommittee meeting. Thank you all for taking time. Patricia and Allison and Joshua and Torrance, thank you all so much. I'm sorry, I should have welcomed you formally. Thank you for coming. And at our curriculum subcommittee meetings, we like to have conversations. So we very much appreciate the conversation. So I'm sorry to interrupt you. I don't want to get you off your flow. The floor is yours, but welcome.
Thank you very much. So again, it's about Baker grade 6, and I'm kind of trying to tell a story, and then we'll go from there. So I was hired to be the Baker principal back in 2019, spring of 2019. And when I was hired, right before and right afterwards, I heard about some of the needs of Baker, which are grade 6 to 8, also the grade 5 to 6 transition as well. And I heard this from parents, heard from teachers, heard from superintendents and things like that. So as I started my first year, we started to get also feedback from people working at Baker about how can we make the upper school better, and specifically, how can we make the grade 5 to 6 transition better. So in early 2020, before COVID, life now is also like kind of pre-COVID and post-COVID. We started kind of putting plans together to get feedback from teachers and staff at Baker, along with just doing research. So we end up doing that, a little delayed because of COVID in May. And from that, we decided to make an updated grade 6 schedule and model. And it really stems from the feedback we got from the community and from teachers about what the needs are between going from grade 5 to grade 6. And in essence, if grade 5, it's more elementary-like, self-contained classrooms where you may switch between social studies and science. And then 6th grade, where the model has been for teachers, teaching singular subjects and kids rotating around. The issue has been a lack of support for executive functioning, and this, kids, falling through the cracks. And this has been a lot of feedback that we've got. And also the research shows it, as you talk about young adolescents, what 11-year-olds need is different from what 14-year-olds need. And so we thought a mindful schedule is to have, instead of having one big team of 4 or 5 teachers, you break up 6th grade into 2 smaller teams. That can be two teacher teams, or 1 3-teacher team, 1 2-teacher team. So this year, we implemented that. It's a 5-section grade 6. There's 1 team of 3 teachers and 1 team of 2 teachers to order to give kids a more, what we call a mindful transition, going from more to self-contained model, and then to kind of have teams, and then 7th and 8th grade, eventually back to full teams of having 4 or 5 teachers on a team. So that's what we've started this year, and we're going to continue doing that model next year and beyond, because it's good for kids. It has been beneficial. We've got a lot of feedback that 6th grade transition this year has been much better. Also, I have people chiming about that, and it's been something that has been very powerful in here at Baker School. I'm also going to have give a chance for Patricia English-Sand to chime in a little bit about what she's seen as well regarding this.
Yes. Hi, thank you for having us today. I did want to mention that when Torrance was giving the story now, we interviewed over 41 staff members. Prior to my role as vice principal, I served in Allison Henry's role as a team facilitator, and I would sit in meetings for students who receive special education services. And it was often brought to my attention concerns regarding the 5th through 6th grade transition. So I heard it from parents, mind you, from a select group of parents in terms of students receiving services, but also from staff members about the concern, specifically around skills and social emotional development. And it was really important to know that that sort of concern has been longstanding. It existed before Principal Lewis came. We know that other previous principals had really looked at it, looked at the concerns, and tried to develop plans for change, and really struggled with that. And so I think what I really have really respected about Principal Lewis's process is it's a process. It's a qualitative and quantitative process to gather information from all the stakeholders to make an informed decision about what's best for middle level learners. And it's been very exciting to watch. I spend a lot of time in the classrooms to listen to meeting with students, to listen to what they're experiencing, the relationships they're building with their teachers. By making the transition a little bit smaller than the transition that we'll have when they are in 7th grade and 8th grade and are therefore ready to go to high school.
Yeah, so again, I mean, to me, I just want to kind of say it's pretty like straightforward. You know, when you have young adolescents, you know, kids should not be hitting a series of brick walls as they go through school. And so again, to reiterate, it's going from like an elementary model to more half teams and then to bigger teams as they get older, and the benefits to come with that, which is more time to form bonds with teachers, more time for executive functioning, and more time for collab time for teachers as well, which is also beneficial. So at this point, as where we get to questions, I also want Miss Allison Henry to give her a chance to talk about some of the things she's seen this year as well in her role as an ETF.
Thank you, Torrance. So in my perspective from reading key meetings and having conversations with parents of students on IEPs, I've received a lot of positive feedback from current 6th grade families, just in terms of how this new model has allowed for the bridge from 5th grade to 6th grade to be the gap, I should say, from 5th to 6th grade to be bridged in terms of that executive functioning, self-advocacy, and the academic rigor, which has allowed for smoother transitions. And so in addition to that feedback from 6th grade families this school year, just the 5th grade families as we're moving towards next school year have been eased in hearing about this model and have been hearing from current 6th grade families, but also just hearing the description of this model has put a lot of families' minds at ease in terms of thinking about what had previously been perceived as a large jump to the middle school model to feel more manageable for their child. And this feedback has even come during meetings with private school families who have now been considering bringing their child back for middle school here at Baker, just in hearing about the amount of scaffolding that this model can allow to allow for that gradual release. We know that is appropriate developmentally for students at this grade level, especially students who are on IEPs.
All right. So before we get to questions, I'm gonna put Joshua Howe on the spot. Josh, do you have anything you want to chime in about before the questions start? Josh is also.
Did I properly unmute?
Yes, you properly unmute. And Josh is right now. He's being a dad. He's his daughter's going to dance class, so he's doing double duty right now, 2 jobs.
Thank you for giving up my secrets. I didn't have much to add. I just sort of wanted to underscore that what this bridge does is it really keeps what's really cherished about the elementary years, the connectedness and small community of a self-contained classroom, the relationships built between peers and between families and teachers and their students. It sort of creates a more of that in what was more of a middle school model where the students in traveling from class to class lose something in that connection. There are some students that are great survivors under that model, and there are very many that really struggle. That's the only piece I wanted to add, but thank you for giving me the time.
I also want to add, keep adding things up before we get to the Q&A, is that by following this model, in addition to other structural changes, it allows us to have a more mindful schedule for middle school teachers in terms of giving them time to consult the special education teacher every week, time to meet the school counselor every week, time to meet the vice principal every week, and have embedded collaboration time twice a week, which allows for time to co-plan and also to receive support. And how I always describe why teaming is so important in the middle school. And and what I like to do, I mean, maybe my mind's just weird this way. You know, when kids are in elementary, they have one teacher who's like, you know, like the be all, you know, just teaching everything. And then in high school, you have more departmentalized teaching. But in the middle school level, you know, kids do need, you know, different subjects taught by different teachers. You know, sometimes it's 2 teachers, sometimes it's 2 or 4 teachers, but they must work together as like one brain, like an elementary. And so in a way, middle school, that teaming part is important, of having that entity kind of meet together, collaborate, so they can meet the kids' needs and be together for that age level, of giving them, it's like, you know, one brain broken up into like 3 to 4 different parts or 2 parts. It's why the teaming part is really important, and supporting that with teachers in the schedule as you make it in a school. All right. We have 10 minutes left. What questions do you guys have?
Anyone have questions, comments? I guess I'll jump in. You know, in listening to you talk about it, and I know, Torrance, you'd come to a previous, when you were first hired, I believe, come to a previous curriculum subcommittee meeting to talk about some of your experiences that you had prior to coming to Brookline in middle schools as well. And so, you know, it sounds like there's some really exciting benefits for kids. And, you know, I want to focus on the students, some really great benefits, especially coming out of COVID, this social emotional supports with building relationships with trusted adults sounds really exciting. You know, this idea of it being a bridge from, you know, one teacher, one self-contained teacher to many adults, and sort of the executive functioning that goes around that, and the ability to provide that scaffolding. Those are just some of the things that, as you were talking, I was making notes, and I was like, well, those are really exciting things. And I think, you know, those are the kinds of things we want to provide in Brookline. So does anyone else want to add or have questions, follow up? Helen?
Well, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
Okay, I just want to add this in. It's, you know, we did talk about that. What I found amazing was, you know, based on, you know, my own experience and many middle school teachers' experience and the research, when we started interviewing the teachers, you know, Pat said we interviewed all 41 upper school teachers. Anyone who was connected to upper school, specialists, gen ed teachers, special ed, we interviewed. A lot of issues they brought up, you know, lack of SEL time, lack of connection, lack of adequate support for executive functioning, were things that can be addressed with a change in the structure and change in the model. And it was amazing how much that aligned with the plan we end up implementing. You know, based on what the needs for Baker were and are, and what the research actually says is good for kids who, as they go through young adolescence. I'm sorry, Helen, go ahead.
That's perfectly fine. No, I'm glad you added that in, because that's important, I think. And I think it's important because Brookline actually, at least when my children were in 6th grade, had 2 teachers who, one taught English social studies, one taught math science. And that was the way it was in almost every grade, every 6th grade across the district. So it's sort of going back to the future or something, or, you know, really doing what we did well back then. And so I commend you on doing that. I think that's important. And then I decided also to contact our 6th grade specialist who just left the school committee, Barbara, and ask her, you know, so what did you do? And, you know, it was a very small school at Driscoll. I think there were like 45 kids in 6th grade. She said, but actually we taught all the subjects in 6th grade, but we worked as a team, the 2 teachers, and worked together. So sometimes we'd split up the class in different ways. It was a team effort, but she taught all the courses. I think basically because it was such a, well, so was Runkle. Runkle was a 2-section school at the time too. So I'm certainly in favor of this. I think it helps kids, you know, with the adjustment. It's a slow way of getting into it. We have the advantage of not having middle schools and being able to do this sort of thing. Whereas in a middle school, you're thrown in, and I guess you could manage it too in a middle school, but to me, it just seems it makes sense. Yeah. So thank you for doing it.
Thank you, Helen.
Would anyone else? Oh, sorry, go ahead, Mr.
I was going to add a little, you know, one thing I like to always emphasize is that, young adolescence is when humans are going through their fastest period of growth since, they were toddlers and babies. And with that, you also can't, that's what they have in common. And you can't lump all young adolescents in one category. What younger adolescents need are different from older adolescents. So what a kid needs at 5th and 6th grade is different at 8th and 9th grade. It's important to do that and not just have a model that's, set for 3 to 4 grades. So while we're talking about kids going from 5th grade and more self-contained and then to half teens at 6th grade, you also want, on the other end, in 8th grade, you don't want to be, too small of a almost like too intimate before they go to high school. And you got to also think about 9th grade. One thing I think relates to this is how, I'm not sure, I don't know the history of Brookline, but how they have the 9th graders at OLS and like a freshman academy. And I'm from Georgia originally, and like about 20 years ago, freshman academies became a big deal in Georgia, where you'd have the freshmen, it's still part of high school, but a little bit more intimate model, more middle school like as they transition. So the transition from 8th and 9th grade was not as harsh. And that was an issue down where I was from. A lot of 8th graders, when the 9th grade would hit a brick wall. So Anthony was here, he'd probably kill me that I'm talking about his school, but it's both ends, so 8th graders need a mindful transition to 9th grade. And you got to think about how 9th grade is and how 8th grade, and the same thing for 5th and 6th. And so I like to think about 8th graders, you still have the teaming, it's a little bit maybe bigger teams. Allows to go to 9th grade where you still may have some teaming as well, or more separate setting as they is scaffolded up to high school. Same thing in 5th and 6th grade. So he's got to keep that in mind, that what a 5th, 6th grader needs is different from an 8th, 9th grader. And that's what the whole point of having the different levels.
Jen, this is Mariah. Can I ask a couple questions?
Sure, absolutely.
Thank you. Thank you, Torrance, and to the Baker team for presenting. I have 2 questions, and part of this is mostly ignorance. So, and you might have mentioned it and I missed it. My first question is, if you could just clarify, one of the things we heard last week, and I don't know to what extent it reflects the practice or the intent, is the idea that teachers, for example, a science teacher would no longer be teaching science. Is that the case? Will they still sort of, independent of what their licensure is for, will they still have the opportunity to teach the thing that they have taught sort of the longest? Or how does that work?
I'll just speak in general how it works. We look at certification. I know everyone's certification in my school like the back of my hand is. So in this case, someone who's taught science for a long time will still teach science, but they may be teaching math and science. And like this year, we have 2 teams. This is also going to answer a question I think someone had. Our 6th grade this year is our biggest grade level in the school. It's actually 5 sections. So it's a 3-section team and a 2-section team. And one team has a math science teacher and an English social studies teacher. And the other team has a science, math, and social studies teacher, and they all teach English in common. So hope I answered your question, Mariah.
I think so. I guess I'm just hoping that it seems like I totally appreciate the benefits, and I'll talk a little bit about this in my experience as a Pierce parent in a second. So, but I guess it also feels like a loss to not be able to the district and to the students and to the school to not be able to leverage not just the licensure, but the amazing years of teaching too. So I'm hoping that as the teams are being built, we're not going to be losing that for the current teams or for future teams, again, because people have we all have what we're best at, right? There's what we know how to do and what we're really good at, right? And I just hope we don't lose that. And that's not a comment specifically about what you're doing, but just in general. And then sort of to my next question is, so I have a 7th grader right now at Pierce, and I have a 10th grader. And my experience at Pierce was, and I think this was done the year before or after my son went through 5th grade, but my daughter experienced this model of, did you call this team teaching? I don't exactly know. It's called team teaching, right? Like this has been pushed to 5th grade at Pierce, and I assume it's still in 5th grade at Pierce. So they do the 2-teacher system at 5th grade at Pierce, and then it's 6th through 8th, it's sort of normal, quote unquote, middle school. And so my question, and this isn't necessarily for you, Torrance, or the Baker team, but it's sort of like, we just had this earlier presentation about how sort of unification of tier 1 instruction. But as far as I know, the 5th grade model of this, like this isn't unified with what's going on, at least at Pierce. I can't speak to all the rest of the district. And I'm sort of wondering if someone can speak to the vision for what is the vision here in terms of, is the district going to a 6th grade team teaching model? Is the district going to a 5th grade team teaching model? What's the vision here? And again, that's not just for you, Torrance, but whoever is answering.
I'll comment first. So this is, what the center of this is child development, young adolescent development. What's best for kids. And I'm not saying in some kind of cheesy way, like some kind of after school special. What's best for kids? I mean, like what's research-based, developmentally appropriate for kids. And like, to kind of reiterate again, it's young adolescents we're talking about, and what's needed for 10 and 11-year-olds is different for like 14, 15, and 13-year-olds. And so one way to see it is that it's also not, it's a general way, younger kids need more scaffolding, half teams, older kids maybe need bigger teams, but it's also not one best way. I always see it, as experience, someone who's taught 5th and 6th grade in my career. 5th and 6th graders are like two sides of the same coin. They're more alike than, say, a 6th grader is to a 7th grader, and then a 5th grader is to a 4th grader. They're two sides of the same coin. And so I've actually taught under myself under both ways, where 5th and 6th grade is that transitional year, where 5th grade, it can be very successful in that kind of self-contained model, some switching, but also the half team model, that's what you're looking for, can also work in 5th grade. It depends on the needs of the school. What you don't want is kids hitting a bunch of brick walls and not getting proper scaffolding, depending on the school structure. And let me give you an example. So if, say we're like another district around here where kids, they went to a K-5 school and then they changed to a 6 through 8. What you want is that since they're doing one big change of changing schools, you wouldn't want the model change to be drastic, because it's almost giving them a double whammy. So if the 6th grade is having half teams in another middle school, it'd be proper to maybe have the 5th grade have half teams. So therefore kids are used to that model and all they're doing is changing buildings. However, if you're in a school like how we are, the one transition is they're going from self-contained to half teams. So therefore there's no need to, there's no building switch. So the scaffolding's already there. That's how the way to approach it is that knowing that kids need something different at the 10, 11-year-old age, and depending on the structure, it can be half teams, it may be self-contained, and it's realizing that as kids go through this from grade level to grade level. I hope to answer your question, Mariah. I don't know about the district part. I mean, but like that's
and I hear what you're saying of like, there isn't necessarily a right model. On the other hand, I think like, I guess my question is, does Brookline believe that it should be in 5th grade, that it should be in 6th grade, or that it can be in either? And I'm not sure we've had that conversation, right? So I think it's important, if we agree that it could be either 5th or 6th, then we should say that and why, as opposed to just having it be the default because no one's talked about it. You know what I mean?
So yeah, so one thing you can put out there is that, like I said, there's like some parameters where having too many teachers at a certain young age wouldn't be good. But then how you do the half teams or self-contained is up to each community. That's how I would answer it. But others can chime in.
Dr. Marini, did you want to?
I just wanted to offer a point of view here as well, that and it comes form of a question, but then I'll go a little further. What is a middle school in a K-8 system? How should we think about middle school education through a K-8 system? Torrance, through his leadership and background and experience, is trying to set up a structure and an organization that really does support the academic, emotional, developmental, personal growth of students. At the Lawrence School, there are half teams in the 7th grade, where there are 2 teacher teams in grade 7. I think the concept of middle school is not a new concept. The National Association of Secondary School Principals published a study and have a publication called breaking ranks in the middle, in which they strongly advocate for teams. And it's the benefit to students is quite frankly significant. They come into grade 6 in a traditional setting. Here they're continuing through the K-8 model, but they're coming in as relatively dependent learners and moving them through grade 6, 7, 8, where they have to make some decisions for high school to become more independent. We must allow them to become more independent. That's part of the developmental process. And then when they get to high school, they have 4 years to become even more independent. And the high school allows for open campus, some choice, because at the end of those 4 years, or close to the end, students have to make significant decisions about their lives, and they have to be involved in those decisions. They have to make those decisions, of course, with guidance. At the same time, to answer Mariah's question directly, I think that and I talked with Linus about this a little bit as well, and it may be time, given the conversations that are going on, the different points of view, to actually put a study group together and actually look at answer the question for Brookline. What should middle school education look like in a K-8 model? And it may not be completely scheduled exactly in each building, we know that. But what are the underpinning values that we're trying to achieve, and what experiences do we want to give kids, and what kinds of supports do we want to give kids, and what kinds of supports do we want to give to teachers who are teaching these students? Because if you're in a half team, you have, and as I thought I heard Torrance say, that there's more time for planning, time to meet with counselors, time to meet with the team itself to discuss issues that students may be having, whether they're academic issues or you get to know students. If you have a half team, then that means that there are half the number of kids that you see for twice the amount of time. So you can get to know those students not only as learners, but as individuals. So you can help those kids become who they are. And so there's a lot here in terms of the implications of it. But Mariah, to answer your question directly, it may be time for Brookline to actually say, how do we want a 6-8 school to operate within a K-8 model? That I think is a big question that will bring a lot of discussion.
Thanks, Jim. I completely agree. Overdue. I'm glad we're talking about implementing it.
Yeah.
So just for some perspective, and I'm going to go to Susan because she's on the subcommittee as well. This was a conversation that the curriculum subcommittee was having pre-COVID, and that was one of the reasons I believe that Torrance came. We were starting to have conversations about project-based learning, about middle schools, about all of these different parts, and then COVID really, the pandemic really diverted where our energies needed to go to or could go to because of all the things that we were working on. So again, happy to have those conversations. And I think that, having lots of stakeholders in a working group or some sort of committee would be fantastic. I'm just supporting that idea, Dr. Meany. I think that that's great. I want to give Susan a chance to speak, and I want to be mindful also of the time. It's after our end time. And so people, I'm sure, have families to go to, but any other committee members who haven't spoken that would like to speak, I'd like to give them a quick moment. Susan?
Yeah, so I won't reiterate what you said, Jennifer. I was going to say most of it, but I couldn't have said it better. So we did push off a middle school program review because of COVID. And so this was slated for this year, unfortunately. So you would have been able to be part of it, Dr. Marini. So you'll have to come back. We won't let go of you. I just want to thank Principal Lewis for coming today and the team. It's just really important for us to hear about sort of how things are going, what the challenges are, what the innovations are that are going on. So just thank you for being here. Just one other point of history. I won't repeat everything Jennifer said, but just one other point. So we originally, it was that K-6 was scheduled with homeroom teachers in Brookline, and 7-8 was sort of the rotation model. And we actually moved that down to 6 because of a variety of reasons. We're trying to, first of all, still try to solve this middle school problem. But the other thing was that there was a concern about lack of rigor, and there was a lack of rigor in sort of in the middle school. And there was this idea that if we the jump from 6 to 7 was too big, so let's kind of move it earlier. Let's give them 6th grade as this transition year. We'll staff it like 7, 8 as a rotation, but we're going to do more wraparound. And I just think that this idea is sort of coming into, it's not a buzzsaw, but coming into the center of a Venn diagram that links how we think about middle school, how we think about social emotional learning, how we think about collaboration time, how we think about interdisciplinary versus subject specific work, how we think about just a whole bunch of things. I won't go through. And so I think one thing that might be helpful is if we could, really sort of pause through this process and sort of learn how this is meeting some of those and sort of what problems it's solving. I think we had a good sense today, but just as we think a little bit more holistically about middle school, hopefully next year, what problems it's solving, if it creates any problems, and how different groups are experiencing this. So how all of our students are experiencing it, how subgroups of our students are experiencing it, how all of our parents, how subgroups of our parents, particularly by race and income and some other things. But I just want to make sure that this works, special education, because you could imagine that it works for the majority, but not other groups, families, teachers. Like there's a whole lot of, sort of real thoughtfulness that's in here. And I think it'd just be really helpful to get some feedback on which pieces seem to be working and which pieces still need more. Because if there are things that are working, it really does need to come into the program review process so we can bring it elsewhere. Because I do think that that's just one of the things we've been trying to figure out for a long time. So thank you for doing this. And there's a lot in here. So I know we're over time. I won't keep going, but thanks for being here.
Are there any other committee members that have not had an opportunity? Stephen?
Just briefly, first, thanks also for coming and talking with us a bit about how you designed and planned this. I really appreciate how you made a fine distinction between the social and emotional learning needs of younger versus older adolescents and how that could be programmed, especially in this time when social and emotional learning is, I think, our community is paying more attention to it than it normally does. Just in the interest, since this has obviously generated a lot of dialogue, both for and against this program, I was wondering, this is also for you, Dr. Marini, if you might share any of the literature or case studies. Dr. Marini, you just referenced one that you would recommend that people read to understand better what you were considering when you designed this intervention.
Yes. I'm sorry. Can I go first, Dr. Marini?
You go, Torrance.
Yeah. So all right. I'll write your name down, Stephen. I'm going to send you something. I'll say tonight, but it might be tomorrow morning. About
no rush.
We have it all documented, and also add links to articles and research that's we used. If you look on the Bulldog Bulletin that I send to parents every 2 weeks or so, it's actually some links in there you can already look at if you find if you find a Baker parent to send it to you. But I'll send something directly to you so you can take a look at that. Some people already received it, but I'm also going to send it to Jennifer and Susan and Mariah as well.
Thanks.
I'll get you started with the link already. Kind of go to that site if you want to start looking around.
Great. Are there any other members who have not had an opportunity to ask questions? Are there any last comments from any of the Baker team or Dr. Marini? Well, seeing none, unless somebody raises a hand quickly. Oh, Dr. Marini, the last word.
I can't stop myself. I just want to thank everybody. I want to thank everybody as well. I also want to thank the teachers who have been commenting in the chat as well. I think this is obviously a process that is difficult. And I want to thank Mr. Lewis and his team. Torrance, I think your leadership has been steady, consistent through this, and comes from the values and your experience. And I think that's your value added to the district in terms of staying the course. Communicating and keeping people moving in the same direction, getting on the same page, so to speak, is really the challenge. I believe, and I think everybody on this call believes, that the teachers care deeply about their students. They care about every single one of them, and they want to do what's best for their students. There is no question the administration cares deeply about its students and cares deeply about the teachers, and trying to work with everyone to try to put together a common sort of effort for the benefit of the students, because in the end, it really is about what's the best environment that we want to have for students, so teachers can unleash their energy in serving students and having a blast doing what they do best, and that the administration can also have a sense of affirmation working with families, knowing that the students are in good hands as they're being taken through their adolescent years and emerging from that process, fully ready to take on the challenges of high school. So thank you, Torrance. Thank you to your team. And Jen, once again, I really thank you for allowing time on your very filled up agenda. Wow.
We did have a lot of really important and timely topics today to cover. We're so glad that everybody could come and talk about this with us. I think it was helpful. I hope it was helpful for committee members to understand more of the information and the background. So it was educational and informational for us. I know there are a number of members of the community. I mentioned this at the beginning of the meeting, with varying perspectives that wanted to speak for public comment, and we did not have that docketed for today. So we'll not be reading anything into the public record or taking any public comment today, but you're always welcome to message, to email school committee members and share your thoughts and ideas with them. Many of you are aware of that. I just want to mention it. I do thank everyone for attending. We had a nice attendee list. It's also being recorded, so anyone who was not able to join us today is welcome to look on the big website and find this recording at a future time. Thank you everyone for coming. I appreciate everyone's time and thoughtfulness in this process, and I look forward to seeing you at our next school committee meeting or our next curriculum subcommittee meeting. And with that, I wish you all a good night.
Thank you.
Thank you.